Hey guys, tonight we drift into the foggy streets of 16th century London, a place teetering between candlelight and chaos, where every shadow could hide a thief, and every whisper might carry a curse. You move quietly past carts stacked with fish, the stink of the Thames rising thick around your boots, and the church bells marking another hour closer to curfew. But tonight, the danger isn't pickpockets or plague. It's a leafy green thing curled innocently on a plate. You're about to learn why the people of this city, hardened by war, fire, and filth, feared something as absurdly mundane as lettuce. And I mean feared. Like it will steal your soul and what your brain feared. You probably won't survive this salad, they joke, half serious and half whispered over pewter cups. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and your local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along Candlewick Street, past the baker's boy hawking yesterday's loaves, and catch a hushed exchange outside an herb stall. Two women, heads pressed close, whisper about a merchant's wife who took ill after eating a supper salad. Not plague, they say. No fever. No rash. Just a sinking, gray silence followed by fits of weeping and wild laughter. The word lettuce is passed between them like a prayer gone wrong. You think they're being silly, but this isn't the first time you've heard it. A neighbor said her aunt grew odd after adding too many greens to her broth. A man at the tavern claimed lettuce softens the brain. You laughed at him, but even the innkeeper's chuckle sounded nervous. London's air is thick with smoke and suspicion. Humors rule health, and lettuce? It's cold and wet. Too cold and wet, they say. Dangerous qualities in a city already chilled by fear and wet with superstition. In the 1500s, physicians didn't see lettuce as a harmless salad base. They saw it as a plant that could cool the body into an unnatural stillness, down to the soul. Historians still argue whether this was based on old Greco-Roman ideas or if English paranoia took it to a darker level. You pause at a butcher's stall, where offal hangs on iron hooks, and a tanner complains his apprentice went slow and fog-minded after stealing a leaf or two from his master's garden. Not ale, not exhaustion, lettuce. He swears it. Somewhere down the road, a bell tolls. A cart carrying the day's dead creaks past. No one connects the bodies to lettuce. Not directly. But the merchant class is muttering. Herbalists are muting recipes. And in the poorer wards, lettuce patches have started to vanish overnight, yanked up like weeds. A scholar at the apothecary shop once explained that certain plants hold energies unfit for unstable minds. Lettuce, he said, steals warmth from your heart. You asked what that meant, and he didn't answer. Just slid a pamphlet across the counter and told you to read plenty. Then he gave you fennel instead. The city flickers. Torches dance in iron sconces. In the distance, you spot a figure staggering down the alley, mumbling in rhyme. Someone shouts, "He's eaten it." A second person adds, "He had salat with his goose." Then laughter, nervous, high-pitched, a little too loud. The man stumbles on. You edge toward your lodging house, but a boy runs past clutching a limp head of lettuce like it's contraband. His mother calls after him not to bring it home. Not tonight. Not with what they've heard. And you, well, now you're curious. Because it's just a vegetable, right? A cold vegetable, yes. One historically linked to both sleep and silence. The Romans thought it soothed lust, the Tudors suspected it smothered thought. But as you climb the creaking stairs and settle in by the fire, something nags at you. Not hunger. Not fear. Just the lingering question. Why, in this city of bloodletting and beer, is lettuce the thing that truly unnerves? The next morning, sunlight slants across your room in lazy streaks, as if even the sun is hesitant to wake properly in this part of London. You sit on the edge of your straw-stuffed mattress, scratching your ankle where the fleas have claimed their turf, and the echoes of last night's lettuce talk linger like smoke in the rafters. Downstairs, Mistress Witherby is ladling out watery porridge and stale oatcakes for the lodgers. She glances at your empty bowl, raises an eyebrow, and mutters, "Best not ask for greens today. Church says it invites decay." You pause with your cup halfway to your lips. Decay? Turns out, there was a time, not all that long before this, that lettuce was praised. Monks grew it in abbey gardens. Physicians prescribed it to calm fevers and ruffled minds. But somewhere along the cobbled road between faith and folklore, that praise curdled. You wander down to a small courtyard tucked between leaning timbered houses. There, behind a cracked fountain, stands an old herb seller named Liddy. She smells like rosemary and vinegar and wears 27 pins in her apron, all for luck. Her table offers all the expected herbs: marjoram, sage, rue, thyme. But no lettuce. Never lettuce. They stopped asking, she says, when you mention it. Stopped trusting. Too many stories. Too many pale faces gone still. You ask her what they used to say, before the fear. Lettuce cooled the heart, she murmurs, fingering a sprig of wormwood. That's what the wise ones wrote. Good for a hot liver. Bad for a cold soul. In humoral theory, you recall, every food had a temperament. And lettuce, well, it was cold and wet in the second degree. Which, in the brittle logic of Tudor physicians, meant it could dangerously tip a body already imbalanced toward melancholia. You shudder. Londoners didn't just dislike cold, they feared what it could do inside. Historians still argue whether this deep-set fear came from true medical concerns or superstition creeping in through the back door. After all, in an age where moon phases were thought to affect bowel movements, blaming greens for grief didn't seem all that far-fetched. And then there's death. It always comes back to death in 16th century London. The smell of it, the memory of it, the constant readiness for it. You remember an old rhyme from your childhood. Lettuce for the sinner, fennel for the free. Eat too much of supper's leaf, and death will sup with thee. A child's rhyme, sure. But now you wonder where it came from. Back in the courtyard, Liddy tells you about a noble family, well-connected, well-fed, whose youngest son wasted away after a summer of salads and sinful idleness. The boy was fond of lettuce, she said. Too fond. Grew pale and strange. Began talking to invisible friends and drawing pictures of empty chairs. One day, he simply stopped speaking. They buried him in a linen shroud scented with sage and left the garden to rot. You thank Liddy for the story and walk back out into the morning bustle, where a fishmonger is gutting eels and an old man sells blessed bread to passers-by. There's something thick in the air, more than soot, more than the usual stink of humanity packed too tight. A kind of nervous energy. You catch a conversation between two women near a fabric stall. One of them says her cousin won't plant lettuce anymore. Not after what happened to the Wetworth boy. No details. Just a name dropped like a stone. You duck into a tavern for warmth, and the innkeeper eyes your damp cloak. He sets down a bowl of something greenish, and when you ask what's in it, he grimaces. No lettuce, he says quickly. Not anymore. Guests complained. You eat it anyway. It tastes like sorrow and vinegar, but at least it's hot. And as the day wanes and shadows stretch long across the cobbles, you find yourself glancing at windowsills, looking for planters. You used to see lettuce growing in little wooden boxes. Not anymore. Now, it's rosemary, garlic, nettles. All sharp, all pungent, all warm. You don't even like lettuce. But somehow, its absence makes you uneasy. And somewhere, deep in the back of your mind, you start to wonder, did anyone really see that boy stop speaking? Or did they just find his drawing of an empty chair and assume the worst? You're standing in the shadow of St. Mary Woolchurch, watching pigeons peck at crumbs between uneven stones, when you overhear two scholars in heated debate. They're draped in thick wool cloaks and powdered wigs that itch in the late morning sun. One jabs a finger toward the sky and barks something about humoral extremes, while the other waves a leather-bound manuscript like it's proof of a divine conspiracy. It's about lettuce. Again. You're starting to realize just how much this city thinks about its vegetables. The scholar with the leather book insists that lettuce, with its cold and moist temperament, poses a serious danger to the already unstable English body. Especially during Lent, he huffs. When abstinence from meat invites imbalance. What fool prescribes such cooling during a time of holy weakness? You're not entirely sure if he's mad or just dramatic. Probably both. But the theory makes an odd kind of sense. In the humoral system, still gospel to Tudor physicians, the body was a cauldron of competing essences, hot, cold, wet, and dry. You weren't supposed to eat based on taste or season but according to your inner balance, which of course nobody could see, but everybody felt confident diagnosing anyway. Lettuce, unfortunately, hit the double whammy, cold and wet. Imagine pouring a bucket of ice water into your metaphorical soul and then wondering why you couldn't remember your prayers. That was the fear. Historians still argue whether this humoral suspicion was more of a scholarly construct or if the common folk genuinely internalized it. But in London, fear trickled down fast. If a barber surgeon mentioned it in passing, your neighbor repeated it. If your neighbor whispered it to a priest, it made it into Sunday's warnings. And before long, even a garden salad felt vaguely heretical. You find yourself outside an apothecary's shop, the sign swinging gently above the door, a brass mortar and pestle against a painted sprig of rue. Inside, the air smells of dried mint and mystery. Shelves creak with glass vials and bundled herbs. The apothecary, a narrow man with ink-stained fingers, greets you with a nod and asks what ails you. You say you're curious about lettuce. He stiffens, just a little, then smiles like someone hiding a dagger behind his back. We don't keep it here, he says lightly. Too volatile. Unstable, when dried. Too moist when fresh. He motions to a thick folio on his desk and flips it open to a page scrawled with diagrams. There, in Latin and careful script, is Lactuca sativa, a drawing of soft green leaves, annotated with warnings about night sweats, vivid dreams, and sluggish thought. In modest amounts, he concedes, lettuce may calm. But in the wrong season? Madness. You see, the body's natural heat declines during Lent. If one consumes too many cooling things at once, lettuce, cucumber, cold spring water, it invites an internal fog. You ask if he believes that. He shrugs. I believe people die from fear as often as from fevers. On the way out, you pass a young man wheezing into a kerchief. He looks like someone who has read too many medical pamphlets and started self-diagnosing. As you round the corner, you hear him ask, is it true it can unman a fellow? Rob him of passion? You don't stick around to hear the answer. In a nearby market, you spot something strange, a boy selling greens in a quiet alley, away from the main stalls. His wares are hidden beneath a coarse linen cloth. You lift the corner. Lettuce. Fresh, dewy, slightly limp. Keep it down, he hisses. Only for people who know what they want. You ask who buys it. Foreigners. Some older folk. A few nobles. Then he leans closer. One lady eats it before Mass. Says it quiets her cravings. Cravings? You arch a brow, and he smirks. You know, the sort the bishop doesn't like. So now lettuce isn't just dangerous to your humors, it's apparently sinful, seductive, and socially subversive. The sun is setting as you walk home, the light slanting across crooked rooftops. You pass a chimney sweep covered in soot, humming something about green leaves and graves. A dog barks. Somewhere a window slams. The chill creeps in, and you pull your cloak tight. You still haven't eaten any lettuce, but you're beginning to feel like you already have. A clatter echoes as you push open the crooked door of Master Fenwick's apothecary. You've been here before, usually for licorice root or a cough powder made of ground cinnamon and chalk. But today, Fenwick squints at you with an expression that says he already knows what you're going to ask. He's polishing a mortar, slow and deliberate, his apron smeared with mysterious green-brown stains that somehow smell both floral and fungal. You want to talk lettuce, don't you? He says, before you've even shut the door. You nod, sheepish. He snorts. Of course you do. Everyone's half obsessed lately. Lettuce for sleep, lettuce for lunacy. Lettuce for those who don't want to wake up again. That last line hangs in the air like damp laundry. He gestures for you to sit at the back bench, beneath shelves lined with jars of dried petals, powders, and things that once moved but no longer do. As he brews something viscous and amber-colored, he begins to lecture, not angrily, but like someone unburdening their brain after a long day of humoring people who think vinegar can exorcise ghosts. In moderation, he starts, lettuce was thought to soothe. The Romans, always the Romans, used it before sleep. Galen loved it. But Galen also believed women had wandering wombs, so let's take that with a grain of salt, shall we? You snort. He continues. Now, in this city, people swing from fashion to fear faster than a cat on a hot oven stone. When Henry's court made salads fashionable, everyone wanted their greens. Even the peasants began picking wild lettuce from ditches. But then the deaths started, unrelated, I'd wager, but sudden. A few quiet passings. No marks. And always after supper. You ask if the lettuce was truly to blame. Fenwick shrugs. Historians still argue whether it was spoilage, superstition, or a genuine reaction. Who knows what else was on the plate? Eel? Mushrooms? Cold stew with last week's veal? Still, he says, the timing couldn't have been worse. London was already on edge. This was a city teeming with theories, The stars could predict your mood, a sneeze could reverse fortune, and menstrual blood could sour beer. Add a couple of unexplained deaths, and suddenly lettuce was culprit number one. Then came Lent, he says, pouring the thick syrup into a blue glass vial. And with it, the usual hysteria. You'd forgotten about Lent. A time when meat vanished from plates, and fish reigned supreme. When people fasted and prayed and listened to their stomachs as much as their priests. With appetites dulled and bodies chilled by the spring damp, lettuce started to look less like a meal and more like a risk. Fenwick points to a parchment hanging by the hearth. It's a handwritten list of food recommendations by humoral type. Under melancholic, someone scribbled, avoid all moist leaves. Lettuce especially. I didn't write that, he says. Came in the post, and signed. Someone's warning, I suppose. He tells you about a colleague, a fellow apothecary near Billingsgate, who prescribed a lettuce tincture to a merchant's wife for headaches. 3 days later, she was dead. No wounds. No fever. Just curled up in bed with a dreamy smile and hands clasped like a doll's. Was it poison? Or just too much cooling for a warm-blooded lady during fasting season? Fenwick lowers his voice. The church didn't approve. Said she died unguarded. Unprotected by prayer. They blamed the food, and me, indirectly. I've stopped recommending it. You stand to leave, and he offers you a small bundle, chamomile, thyme, a bit of aniseed. No lettuce, he adds. Better safe than suspicious. Outside, the streets feel sharper, more angular. You're starting to realize that lettuce isn't just a vegetable in this city, it's a symbol. Of danger. Of imbalance. Of something quiet that slips past your guard and takes root in your blood. As you walk past St. Margaret's, the bells toll for evening prayer. A boy hawks honeyed almonds nearby, calling out a rhyme. Green leaf, thief, steals your breath and sweet belief. You glance back at Fenwick's door, then at the almond seller, then toward home. Something about this fear clings to your skin now. Not panic, just a faint sense that you stepped into a story you don't fully understand. And somewhere, under it all, a new kind of hunger is growing. You wake to the clatter of a cart and the distant clang of church bells, their tones slurred by the heavy morning mist. It's the kind of damp that seeps into your clothes before your eyes are fully open, and today, it smells like smoke, wet straw, and something more unsettling, lilac-sweet decay. As you rise and stretch, a newscaller shouts from down the street. Another death in Aldersgate. Fever? No! Salad. You groan. It's not even breakfast yet, and already the city is muttering about lettuce like it's the devil's garnish. You tug on your boots and head toward the square, following the whispers like breadcrumbs. There's a gathering by the stocks, not for punishment but for spectacle. A portly town crier is reading from a parchment, and the crowd leans in close, a wall of cloaks and suspicion. Was found lying still as moonlight, no sign of struggle, no blemish or boil. Neighbors report she supped on cold meats and, he lowers his voice for effect, a portion of fresh-cut salad, which included several leaves of the forbidden sort. Forbidden sort. The words ripple through the crowd. You catch a glimpse of the body as the cart trundles past. She's covered, face hidden, but her hands are visible, pale, folded, and oddly serene. The people murmur that it was the lettuce. Again. You linger long enough to hear someone spit and mutter, "Mark my words, them who eat lettuces die empty." You turn away, unsettled. It's the third case in 2 weeks. No plague boils. No coughing. No violence. Just a salad, a sleep, and then silence. You make your way to the city gardens, what's left of them. Once vibrant plots now look clipped and bare. The lettuce beds, in particular, are conspicuously empty. Where rows of green once stood, there's only turned soil and the occasional hopeful weed. You spot an old man crouched by a half-covered garden row, whispering to the earth. He glances up, startled, and quickly covers something with a burlap cloth. You ask what he's hiding. Nothing, he snaps. Then softens. They say it spreads quiet death. But I've eaten it since I had teeth. Never did me harm. You raise a brow. He huffs. Historians still argue whether it was the lettuce or the fear of it that killed more. But I know this, men die when they stop trusting their own mouths. He pats the soil like a sleeping dog and returns to his muttering. You wander onward, thinking. The stories are starting to blur. Lettuce makes you melancholy. Lettuce dulls your senses. Lettuce invites death by freezing your inner fire. But now Now it's being accused of something darker. There's a tavern near the docks called the Sobbing Fish, charming name. Inside, it smells of spilled ale, sea salt, and old leather. The proprietor, a leathery woman with a glass eye, nods as you sit. You hear about the lettuce? Apparently, it's just assumed now. She pours you a mug of small beer and slides over a platter of cold goose. No greens. Not since the plague year, she says. You blink. Lettuce during the plague? She nods, leans close. Year of 56. Heat was brutal. Nobody could keep food down. Some clever man, probably a foreigner, suggested raw greens to cool the blood. She spits on the floor. People dropped like flies. Some say it was the plague. Others say the lettuce weakened them first. Gave death a head start. You frown. But that doesn't make sense. She chuckles. Nothing in London ever does. And perhaps she's right. Perhaps that's the truest thing you've heard all day. Because even though every logical bone in your body tells you that a leaf can't kill, you can't shake the image of the woman's pale, folded hands, the empty garden beds, the old man whispering to soil, and the city's simmering terror that the very thing once meant to calm might now quietly betray. The woman behind the bar shrugs. We stopped serving it. Safer that way. Folks are jumpy. Some won't even eat mint. Say it shares a root. It doesn't. But you don't argue. Instead, you finish your beer in silence, the cold seeping into your bones, and wonder, how does something so soft earn a reputation so sharp? Night slips into the city like ink into water, slow, creeping, and irreversible. You find yourself at a candlelit gathering in the parlor of Lady Maribel, a minor noble with extravagant sleeves and a taste for mystery. She hosts these salons every third Thursday, poetry readings, recitations from Pliny and Paracelsus, maybe a lute if the player isn't drunk. But tonight, the conversation has drifted, inevitably, to lettuce. A hush falls as a wide-eyed housemaid recounts a recent dinner. She just slumped, mid-fork, the girl says, voice trembling. The lady of the house was halfway through her salad when she went still. I thought she'd fallen asleep, but her eyes, they were open. Someone gasps. Lady Maribel raises a jeweled hand. Let's be sensible, friends. Correlation is not causation. But even she avoids the platter of greens brought in by an oblivious servant. You take a closer look. It's not just lettuce. There are cucumber slices, sprigs of mint, and, rather bravely, a few nasturtiums. But it's the lettuce that makes the air feel tight. One guest, a foppish man in lemon-yellow hose, insists that the story was a coincidence. Probably apoplexy, he says. Nothing to do with the salad. Lady Maribel tilts her head. Then why do the stories repeat? You sip from your pewter cup and listen. The term salad, popular among the wealthy, was often a mix of herbs and cold leaves dressed in oil or verjuice. The Tudor elite loved them, especially when dining in warm months. But cold food plus a cold temperament leaf? Bad humor or math. Mix that with wine and a long Lent, and you had a recipe for what physicians called melancholic corruption. That's the theory, anyway. But tonight, it's a rumor in real time. You glance around the room. No one is touching the salad. They eat the meat, they nibble the bread. But the greens remain glistening, untouched, a chilled ghost in the center of the table. A lady in blue whispers that she once saw a cook dismissed, banished, really, for slipping lettuce into a stew. Not because it ruined the flavor, but because the master of the house claimed it cursed his dreams. He'd woken every morning feeling absent, whatever that meant. The cook wept, swore it was fresh. Said she'd grown it herself. Didn't matter. The lettuce was blamed. The dreams were proof enough. You started to notice how these stories share certain patterns. Sudden silence. Dreaming while awake. Blank expressions. No fevers. Just drifting. Like minds had been unanchored. Like the soul had taken a wrong turn in the dark. Historians still argue whether this was hysteria, food poisoning, or a kind of psychosomatic reaction. Some suggest that contaminated oil or poor preservation methods may have contributed. But what sticks isn't the science. It's the silence. You glance at the salad again. One brave guest forks a leaf, holds it up dramatically, and grins. Shall I tempt fate? He declares. The room doesn't laugh. A few people glance toward the window. He drops the leaf back into the bowl. Later that evening, The lute player, clearly emboldened by claret, sings a bawdy song about a nobleman's affair with a milkmaid who laced his dinner with lettuce and left him less than a man. There's scattered laughter, but it's uneasy, like everyone's playing along in hopes the subject will turn elsewhere. It doesn't. Lady Maribel excuses herself early. One guest claims a headache. Another mutters something about needing to pray off the chill. You step outside into the cobbled garden, moonlight casting the rosemary and lavender in pale silver. At the far end of the hedge, you spot it, a small bed of lettuce, drooping slightly with dew. A gardener crouches nearby, trimming the edge of the path. You ask him if he tends the salad leaves. He shakes his head without looking up. She grows but won't eat You nod, then ask, so why keep them at all? He finally looks at you. Some fears don't come from facts. They come from roots too deep to pull. You leave the garden in silence. Fog creeps over the Thames like a grey lace shawl, softening the sharp outlines of boats, chimneys, and chapel spires. You cross London Bridge before sunrise, drawn to the market's slow stirrings and the smell of yesterday lingering in gutters. There's a stall on the Southwark side you remember, an old herbalist who sells dandelion wine and mystery powders in tiny folded papers. She always has something strange. Today, her table is unusually bare. Not bringing out the greens, you ask. She gives a short laugh. What, and end up like Marjorie Brent? You blink. Who's Marjorie Brent? She was a hedge witch. Well, not by trade, but in practice. Always mucking about with tonics. Claimed lettuce could drive spirits from a house. She leans in. One night she makes a salad for a grieving widow. Said it would help her sleep. The widow woke up laughing and never stopped. You pause. Never stopped? The woman nods, dead serious. Giggled herself into a fit. Died within the week. And Marjorie? Burned her garden. Said no plant should have that kind of power. You're not sure what's more unsettling, that someone believed it, or that someone believed it enough. The story sounds familiar, too. You've been hearing variations for days now. But this one adds a new layer, lettuce as a kind of mystical agent. Not just dangerous for the body, but active in the unseen world. It's the first time you've heard it directly connected to spirits, though. A spiritual poison, not a physical one. Historians still argue whether the fear of lettuce was purely humoral, or if it occasionally mingled with the shadowy dread of folk magic. After all, the 16th century wasn't sure on witches, real or accused, and the line between a healer and a heretic was as thin as a thread pulled too tight. You pass through the edge of the market, where a cluster of vegetable sellers sits silently behind mostly empty crates. The usual chatter is missing. You spot one woman with a single bunch of greens tied in twine. You ask what it is. Chard, she says, quickly. Then, more quietly, it used to be lettuce. But people won't buy it now. Not since the Watford girl. You don't even ask this time. It's become a pattern. A name. A salad. A symptom. A story. You drift toward the edge of the city, where the gardens grow wide and fence. You've heard of a monastery with an ancient herbal plot, where monks once grew plants for both medicine and mead. They still keep records. You talk your way in under the pretense of donation. A kindly friar in worn robes leads you past tidy rows of sage, feverfew, and tansy. But the lettuce beds? Empty. You ask. He stops walking. It's fallen out of favor. Because of humors? Because of dreams. You frown. Dreams? He nods, slow and steady. One of the brothers kept eating it, even after warnings. Claimed it helped him think more clearly. But over weeks, he became hollow, quiet. Then he began writing strange things. Not blasphemy, nothing that would get him punished. But lines without endings. Questions without verbs. He stared at the garden for hours. Then, one night, he walked into the river. You glanced toward the Thames, now just visible through a break in the trees. They pulled him out, the friar says, still breathing. But he's never spoken since. He makes the sign of the cross and changes the subject. You leave with a sense that you're gathering not evidence, but fragments, pieces of a city-wide ghost story still in progress. Lettuce is beginning to feel less like a vegetable and more like a mirror, reflecting everything Londoners fear: stillness, silence, and slipping out of control. By the time you return home, the fog has lifted, but the air is heavier somehow. You boil water for tea and stare at your windowsill planter. You don't grow lettuce. But now, you almost want to, just to prove something. You're not sure what. And then you wonder, not for the first time, what if they're right? By the following evening, you've managed to wrangle an invitation into the royal kitchens, not because you're important, but because your cousin's husband once cured a duke's dog of a swollen paw. You know how London works, favors stacked like firewood and passed around until someone gets burned. The palace kitchen is a madman's orchestra, dozens of bodies in a cramped dance of cleavers, pastry, and scalding pots. You dodge a swinging ladle and nearly trip over a boy carrying a vat of leeks. A woman with salt in her eyebrows yells at you to stand clear of the fire door. You're not sure who's in charge, until you spot him. Master Godfrey, head cook to the court. His apron is a map of sauces, and his beard is braided for hygiene. He greets you with the enthusiasm of a man who's had exactly 12 hours of sleep in the past week. You mention you're curious about Tudor food, specifically, salad. He stops stirring. Salad, he says, like it's a curse word. You mean salad. You nod. He frowns. We don't make it. You blink. Not at all? Not these days. Not for court. Not since Lady Farley. He doesn't elaborate. Instead, he walks you past tables of capons and custards, poached pears, roasted venison glazed with clove and honey. Everything warm, dense, and carefully arranged. But not a leaf in sight. Once upon a time, he says, lifting a ladle of almond cream to his lips, the Queen liked a little salad with her pheasant. Something crisp to cut the richness. We'd use endive, rocket, mustard greens. And, yes, sometimes lettuce. The sweet, pale kind from Kent. He sets the ladle down, sighs. Then that business with the Duchess happened. You wait. You're getting good at waiting for stories now. She was dining with a Spanish envoy. Had a plate of roast duck, some stewed cherries, and a garnish of greens. It was late spring, and the kitchens were experimenting with raw dishes again. She took 2 bites, then fell asleep at the table. Didn't wake up for 3 hours. When she did, she was weeping. Couldn't say why. And you think it was the lettuce? I don't think anything. I just know what happened next. The Queen banned raw greens from her table. Said they made the mind soft and prone to flights. You whistle low. So that was it? Just like that, lettuce was done. He shakes his head. Not quite. Some courtiers pushed back. They liked their salads, claimed they helped with digestion. But then a musician collapsed after a banquet. Then the Bishop of Ely got dreamy and disoriented after a Lenten meal. One by one, people started whispering. He leans close. Historians still argue whether it was the lettuce or something else. But I tell you, it's hard to serve something that makes people fall asleep at royal dinners. There's a pause. Somewhere, someone drops a tray. Godfrey straightens. Now we serve warm greens. Steamed. Cooked. Wilted. Safer that way. He walks you past the larder, where racks of game birds hang beside jars of pickled pears. In the corner, behind a curtain of nettles and chives, you spot a crate. Of lettuce. Fresh. Pale. Crisp. You nod toward it. He glances. Only for the foreign guests, he says. Spaniards. French. They don't fear it like we do. But we don't eat it ourselves. You ask if it's ever poisoned anyone. He considers. Not as far as I know. But not everything that harms leaves a mark. Before you go, you ask why they keep it at all if no one here eats it. Because people expect options, he mutters, even when they fear them. As you leave the kitchens, the smell of roasting meats and caramelized onions clings to your cloak. Outside, the palace gardens stretch under a dusky sky, neatly trimmed and perfect in rows. You spot a small patch of greens near the edge. Lettuce again. Just sitting there, innocently leafy, backlit by the final rays of the sun. And yet, you feel it, the tiniest chill, like someone walked over your grave. You're standing outside the gates of Bethlehem Royal Hospital, better known in London by its other name, Bedlam. Even the wind seems to shift nervously here, dragging sour smells down from the ward windows, mixing them with the sweet, waxy scent of the nearby candle maker. Inside those walls are the city's most feared and forgotten, the raving, the withdrawn, the shattered minds and unquiet souls. You're not entirely sure why you've come. Curiosity, maybe. Or that itch behind your ear that hasn't gone away since the apothecary warned you that lettuce could soften the edges of the mind. You want to believe it's all superstition, but the stories won't quit. And neither will your thoughts. A gatekeeper eyes you, then nods you through after you bribe him with a few pennies and a lie about being related to a patient. Inside, the noise is immediate, wails, mutters, and a long, slow hum that seems to vibrate up from the stone floor itself. The overseer, a tired man who smells of ink and despair, shows you around without much ceremony. No touching, he says. And no promises. He gestures to the cells. You pass a man reciting lists of birds, over and over, never blinking. A woman weaving invisible thread between her fingers, mumbling about fire. Another stands still as a fence post, eyes wide, face slack. She hasn't spoken in months, the overseer says. Used to be a merchant's wife. Dined well. Fell ill after a supper of soft greens and fish. They say she giggled for an hour, then went silent. You pause. Did they say what kind of greens? Always the same. He doesn't need to say it. In the next cell, a man paces, muttering recipes. Chop it fine, dress with lemon, never too cold, never too cold. The overseer shrugs. Some were always fragile. But lately, we see more with empty eyes and calm hands. Not violent. Just absent. Historians still argue whether this quiet madness was always there, just unnamed, or whether something in the culture, religion, repression, rancid meat, was creating new kinds of withdrawal. But among the public, the answer was simple. Something had made these people lose their minds, and lettuce was suspiciously consistent in every tale. You're led past the garden. Yes, even here, Bedlam has a garden. Mostly for herbs, a few root vegetables, and 2 neat rows of lettuce. You point. The overseer sighs. We stopped feeding it to patients, he says. Too many complaints. But the cook insists on keeping a patch. Says it's good for his own sleep. You want to ask, how's his mind doing? Instead, you linger beside a low stone wall where a nurse is spoon-feeding a young woman porridge. The woman stares straight ahead. She was a scribe, the nurse murmurs. Sharp as a tack. Then she began skipping meals, except her salads. Said they cleared her head. A month later, she couldn't finish a sentence. You shiver. Whether it's fear or the cold, hard to say. As you prepare to leave, the overseer stops you. Strange thing is, he says, they're all peaceful. As though they slipped into a quieter world. No rage. No confusion. Just, he hesitates, drifting. You nod. You've seen that same drifting look in all the stories. The widow who laughed, the merchant's son who drew empty chairs, the cook's dreams, the duchess at court. Always drifting. Outside the gates, London looks almost too loud. A baker shouts his prices. A pair of children shriek as they chase a hoop. Somewhere, a priest is giving a sermon on temptation. You cross the street and pass a tavern where a signboard reads, "No salads served. No exceptions." It's not a joke. It's protection. And as the door swings shut behind you, you wonder. If the mines in Bedlam have floated away, is it possible they've found peace the rest of London never knew? Or did they just eat the wrong thing at the wrong time? It's barely dawn when you slip through the low gate into the market gardens on the outskirts of Essex. The dew hasn't burned off yet, and your boots leave damp trails along the packed dirt path. You came out here on a tip. Someone said the lettuce growers were quitting, pulling up their plants in the dead of night, quietly, nervously, as if they were hiding bodies. You want to see for yourself. The first few plots still look green and healthy, spinach, endive, turnip greens. But then you reach the lettuces. Or rather, the places where lettuces were. The beds have been freshly turned. Soil dark, raked smooth, and pointedly empty. At the far end, you spot a man stooped over a wheelbarrow, pushing something under a tarp. He's dressed like a working farmer but wears the stiff shoulders of someone who's had a few too many strangers ask the same question. You raise a hand in greeting. Lettuce? He freezes, then slowly turns. No such thing here, he says. I heard you used to grow it. He gives you a long look. Used to. Now we don't. You ask why, and he sighs like you've asked him to explain winter. Started small. A woman from town said her baby stopped crying after she rubbed him with lettuce water. Then another woman tried it. Her baby stopped crying, too. Stopped crying forever. You wait. He's not done. Then a boy went missing. They said he'd been grazing in the field, picking the greens. They found him sitting under a tree 3 days later. Still breathing. No words. You try to interject, but he's on a roll. Historians still argue whether any of that's true. But people here don't need proof. We just need a few stories and a reason to be careful. He pulls back the tarp. Inside the wheelbarrow is a pile of uprooted lettuce heads. Pale. Slumped. Some still wet with dew. They look pathetic. Harmless. He gestures to them. You ever look a lettuce in the eye? You blink. They don't have eyes. Exactly, he mutters, covering them again. Nothing behind them. Nothing at all. You walk with him toward the barn, where a few other growers are gathered in tense conversation. They eye you suspiciously. You're not from around here, and more importantly, you're asking the wrong questions. One of them leans on a hoe and says, "Truth is, we can't sell it anymore. Even if we wanted to. People won't buy it?" He snorts. "Won't touch it. We had a dozen heads in the stall last week." A priest walked by and crossed himself like we'd hung a noose. You ask what they'll grow instead. Anything else? Cabbage. Parsley. Sorrel. But not that. He spits. My wife says even the hens started laying funny after she fed them the leaves. Don't want to know what that means. As the sun rises higher, the farmers drift away, leaving you alone with the wheelbarrow of orphan greens. One droops over the edge like it's trying to escape. You kneel, pluck a leaf, and rub it between your fingers. It smells faintly sweet, clean, innocent. And yet, you don't put it in your mouth. Not today. As you head back toward the main road, you pass a shrine at the edge of the field. It's little more than a wooden cross and a few wildflowers jammed into a bottle. But someone scratched a message into the wood. Too much stillness can unmake a soul. You keep walking. Later, as you board a cart bound for the city, the driver eyes the dirt on your boots and says, "Been out near the lettuce fields?" You nod. He just shakes his head. Should have worn garlic. You've never given much thought to snails before. Not until today. Not until the whispers at the baker's stall turned to old superstitions, and someone swore up and down that if a snail crossed your lettuce, it meant someone in your house would die by the next new moon. Absurd? Sure. But in 16th century London, absurd is often just another word for generally accepted wisdom. You're in the back room of a bookseller's shop, thumbing through a worm-eaten herbal compendium when the shopkeeper, Mr. Coates, a man who smells of paper and damp wool, mentions it casually. "Snails," he says, "don't touch lettuce unless they sense something already wrong in it. That's what my grandmother told me." You raise an eyebrow. They can smell evil? Not evil. Decay. Badness. Something out of balance. You flip a page and find a strange diagram, lettuce with little symbols hovering above the leaves, Saturn, water droplets, a curled snail. The caption, in cramped Latin, loosely translates to, "When the cold moon draws moisture from the leaves, beware the creeping things who circle them." Charming, you mutter. But the shopkeeper isn't laughing. He tells you a story. About a family in Finch Lane who tended a little kitchen garden behind their home. One spring, they noticed snails gathering on their lettuce, not just one or two, but dozens. Sluggish, persistent, always returning no matter how many they flung into the Thames. Within a week, the mother fell into a stupor. The daughter began sleepwalking. The youngest son, gone without a trace. You don't know how much of this to believe, but you do know the story's gotten around. Some cooks now slice lettuce crosswise, not lengthwise, claiming it keeps the moist spirits from gathering. Others plant rosemary around their greens to discourage watchers, whatever that means. Historians still argue whether these beliefs came from old Roman agricultural customs or more local folktales, but what's certain is that lettuce had, by this point, graduated from dangerous food to outright omen. It was no longer just something you ate. It was something that warned you. You wander into the poorer quarters by Candle Lane, where food is rarely wasted and superstitions live longest. A grandmother is dabbing vinegar on her doorway to ward off Sallet sickness. Her granddaughter tells you, with perfect sincerity, that snails carry messages from the dead. They like the lettuce because it remembers things, she whispers. You can't decide if that's adorable or horrifying. That night, as the moon climbs over the city, you pass a stall where someone has tried to sell a small bowl of cold greens. It's untouched. A single snail has found its way to the edge of the dish, inching forward like it owns the place. You stop. Watch it. Slow, deliberate, it stretches its little eye stalks toward the lettuce. And in that moment, brief, ridiculous, and somehow profound, you feel a flicker of something ancient. You remember what Liddy said back in the herb courtyard. That lettuce was too cold for souls. And suddenly, it doesn't seem so strange that the slowest creatures in London might be drawn to the stillest food. You turn away and walk home without looking back. The mist is thick again tonight, heavier than usual, like it's trying to hush the city into submission. You've wandered far from your usual haunts, past the ale-soaked cheer of the inns and into the softer hush of the village lanes, where cottages lean in like they're sharing secrets. You're looking for someone to call Magdalene the Quiet. Not her real name, surely, but the kind that sticks when people don't want to say which out loud. Her home is easy to find. Every hedge along the road is ragged, every fence chipped, and then, there it is. A perfect little cottage with a thriving garden of herbs no one in town will touch. There's a crow carved above the door and an iron horseshoe nailed upside down just below it. You knock. The door creaks open. She's older than you expected, but not in the crooked back, claw-fingered way the stories describe. Her eyes are sharp. Her hands are clean. She gestures for you to sit, then offers you tea from a pot that smells of rosemary and something metallic. "I'm here about the lettuce," you say. She grins, an expression that says, "Of course you are. You want to know if I use it for spells." You hesitate. "Do you?" "Yes." She doesn't blink. But not in the way they think. You glance around the room. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters. A bowl of quartz sits beside a jar labeled snake teeth. And on the table between you, a salad. Not wilted. Fresh. Dressed in oil. Quietly defiant. "You're not afraid to eat it?" you ask. "I'm afraid of plenty," she replies, "but not leaves." What people fear in lettuce is the same thing they fear in silence. It slows the blood, slows the mind, makes you see things you spend all day avoiding. You take a sip of your tea and realize your hands are trembling. "They say it draws out the soul," you murmur. Magdalene smiles again, slower this time. "It reveals the soul." "You lot don't like that." You ask if she's ever seen it do harm. "Oh yes," she says. "But not because of magic. Because people don't listen. They eat it at the wrong time, in the wrong way, for the wrong reasons. They eat it cold when they're already grieving. They eat it during Lent, when their bodies are hollow and shivering. They think it'll calm them. It doesn't. It deepens what's already there." You frown. "So the lettuce isn't cursed?" "It's a mirror," she says. "And mirrors aren't kind." Historians still argue whether herbalists like Magdalene were persecuted for their practices or for simply being women who didn't need to marry to survive. But one thing is certain, their knowledge outlived the men who tried to burn it. Magdalene stands and walks you to the door. Before you go, she hands you a folded paper. Inside is a single lettuce seed. Pale. Smooth. Light as a whisper. "If you ever want to know the truth," she says, "grow it yourself. Just be careful when it flowers." You step into the night, heart heavier than when you arrived. The fog curls around your legs as you head back toward town. Somewhere behind you, a lute is playing, off-key and slow. And for the first time since this began, you realize. You don't fear the lettuce itself. You fear what it reveals. You find yourself in Cheapside on a chilly market morning, the kind where your breath fogs the air and every stone underfoot feels just a little too slick. The stalls are up early, pies, fish, boiled sweets, and rough baskets of root vegetables, though there's something oddly absent. You don't spot a single leaf of lettuce, not even the tired, wilted kind that used to sit next to the mint and purslane. Street vendors eye you warily, especially when you ask about greens. "No call for it now," mutters a woman selling meat pasties. "Folks say it puts a chill on the heart." She says it the way someone might talk about a curse. A phrase passed around until it felt like truth. You buy a pasty to be polite and take a bite. It's hot and peppery, with just enough grease to make your fingers shine. You ask if they ever served cold herb pies. She leans in, lowering her voice. "Used to. Back when people thought salads were fashionable. We'd fold in herbs, a bit of cheese, sometimes even lettuce." Then that boy went pale in the middle of the square. Sat down on the cobbles like someone had pulled his bones out. You raise your eyebrows. "Lettuce?" He'd eaten 3 pies. Said he felt too calm. She shakes her head. Went home and didn't speak again for 3 weeks. His mother said his dreams were quiet as the grave. Another vendor chimes in. "It's bad for the belly. Cold on cold, makes the soul go inward. No place for that in a city like this. We need noise. We need heat." That might be the most honest explanation you've heard all week. Historians still argue whether Londoners avoided lettuce out of fear of humoral imbalance or because of practical trade reasons. After all, imported grains spoiled fast. But to the people here, the reason doesn't matter. The result does. Lettuce is gone from their menus, their stalls, their truss. You keep walking, deeper into the market's belly. A man selling eel tarts sees you eyeing a side tray and huffs, "Don't ask. I don't serve that anymore." That is a plate of something suspiciously green beneath a covering of oiled cloth. You lift the corner. Not lettuce, parsley, maybe. But the man flinches anyway. You ask if anyone still dares to sell salettes. He rubs the bridge of his nose. There's a cart by the old bell. Some foreigner. Italian, I think. Still serves cold greens. Says they're good for digestion. And people eat it? Drunk ones. Or those with nothing to lose. You make your way toward the old bell, not sure what you expect to find. The streets grow narrower, louder, thick with clattering hooves and the bark of dogs fighting over bread crusts. Finally, there it is, a cart, small and gleaming with polish, parked under the overhang of a crooked house. The vendor wears bright red sleeves and a hat with a long feather, far too cheerful for this part of town. You approach. You serve salettes? He beams. But of course, only the best. Wild rocket, mustard leaves, young chicory, fresh today. You glance over his ingredients. Sure enough, there's lettuce. A soft, butterleaf kind, crisp and sweet-smelling. He sees your hesitation. You have heard the stories, yes, he says, smirking. They say it steals dreams. Bah! He picks up a leaf, bites it. If dreams are so easy to steal, perhaps they are not worth keeping. You ask if anyone else buys from him. Mostly students, he says. And lovers. Lovers? He winks. They say lettuce calms the nerves. Makes the heart less foolish. A good thing, no? You don't answer. Because now you're wondering, if it truly does still the heart, what does that mean for love? For longing? For risk? You leave without buying anything. By evening, the stalls are packing up, and the street food smoke begins to fade. But the fear lingers. In the stiff shoulders of the vendors. In the way they skip over certain items when listing their wares. In the silence around the subject of salad. Because in London, it's not just about what you eat, it's about what you let inside. It's just after dusk when you duck into the cramped, warm cottage of Mistress Elfrida, the most respected midwife in the South Side wards, and, by most accounts, the most feared. Her walls are lined with dried herbs and copper tools that glint in the firelight. She wears a dark shawl over her shoulders and a perpetual look of having just told someone something they weren't ready to hear. You don't bother pretending. I'm here about lettuce. She snorts. Of course you are. Everyone always is, eventually. You sit, careful not to knock over a mortar full of crushed raspberry leaves. She pours 2 mugs of steaming broth and sets them down. Her hands are cracked from soap and centuries of nervous sweat. I won't serve it to mothers, she says, eyes on the fire. Haven't in years. Not since Bess died. You wait. Every story begins with a name. Bess was barely 16, barely showing. Craved greens like mad. Said they settled her stomach. I warned her, told her what lettuce does. Not to eat too much, especially not cold. But her husband, Lord bless his thick skull, said greens were healthy. She ate a full bowl. She pauses. The next morning, she couldn't wake. Your mouth goes dry. The baby? Gone too. Still inside, but gone. She stares into the flames. She came back to us a week later, as if from far off. Never remembered a thing. You ask what she thinks caused it. Too much cold, Elfrida says. Too much quiet. Lettuce cools the blood, dulls the senses. And in childbed, that's the last thing you want. You need fire. You need movement. You glance at the herbs hanging above, mugwort, motherwort, fennel, tansy. Warming plants. Agitating ones. But not a single leaf of lettuce. She leans forward. It's not just about the mother. It's the child, too. There's an old saying among midwives, lettuce before the quickening makes the babe forget to stir. You frown. Is that real? Or just rhyme? Elfrida shrugs. Does it matter? Historians still argue whether midwives spread these beliefs out of actual experience or as a means to keep control over fragile births. But even among the literate few, lettuce carried reputational baggage. Thomas Eliot, a respected Tudor scholar, warned of its dulling effects. If men feared it for weakening thought, women feared it for smothering life. You ask Elfrida if she ever tried it herself. Once, she says. Long ago. I was curious. Ate it fresh from the garden, with oil and lemon. She chuckles darkly. Had no dreams for a week. Slept like a dead bird. She picks up her mug, drinks deep. It's not poison, not exactly. But it slides into the parts of you that are least awake and pulls them deeper down. Most people don't notice. Pregnant women do. She stands, brushing crumbs from her apron. I tell them now, eat heat, ginger, broth, wine if needed, but no salad. Not till after the child comes. And not too soon after that, either. Outside, the moon is rising, pale and high. A dog barks. You see the silhouette of a man walking home with a bundle of herbs under one arm. You thank her for the broth, for the honesty. She presses a sprig of rue into your hand as you go. For protection, she says. And digestion. You walk home thinking of unborn children and the things they may never dream, of cold leaves pulling heat from a woman's blood. Of London's women passing down warnings in kitchens and cradles and whispered side prayers. And of lettuce, not dangerous like a blade, but quiet, patient, soft around the edges, like something waiting for silence to settle before it does its work. By Sunday morning, the bells are calling the faithful to pews, and the city smells of rain-soaked stone and coal smoke. You slip into a small parish church near Bishopsgate, one of those tucked between alleys places with a crooked steeple and pews worn smooth by centuries of uneasy prayer. You're not here to confess, at least, not officially. You're here to listen. The priest, a tall, pale man with a voice like falling snow, is already well into his sermon when you arrive. You slide into the back row. It takes less than 5 minutes before he says it. Beware, my children, what dulls your minds and weakens your guard. The devil does not shout, he whispers. He does not strike, he seeps. You already know what's coming next. There are foods of virtue, and foods of vanity. There are herbs of clarity, and herbs of confusion. And among these, he pauses, lets the silence draw tight, we find the lettuce. A leaf so soft it slips past the tongue and straight into the soul. A few heads nod. Someone crosses herself. He goes on to say that lettuce was once a symbol of moderation, of sleep, of temperance. But now, it has become a symbol of indulgence, of numbness, of spiritual sleep. Historians still argue whether the early church truly feared such foods, he says, switching tones with surprising sharpness, but we know better. For what the body consumes, the soul must digest. That gets a few scattered amens. After the service, you loiter near the chapel doors, pretending to study the stone carvings. You overhear a trio of parishioners discussing the sermon. One of them, a middle-aged woman with red gloves, says, "He's right, you know. I had lettuce once before communion and felt empty all day. Not weak, not sick, just nothing." Another woman nods. Father Ambrose said it makes the flesh forget to feel. That phrase sticks with you. You ask the priest, after the crowd thins, if he believes lettuce can dull the soul. He studies you for a long moment. "I believe that the Lord made all things with purpose. But man misuses them." He points toward a small side chapel, where a statue of a saint stands in quiet contemplation. That one fasted for 30 days. Ate nothing but barley and wild greens. But never lettuce. Said it invited too much silence. You ask what that means. "Some silences are holy," he replies. "Others are hollow. The trick is telling which is which." You leave the church with the chime of bells still echoing behind you and the faint scent of incense clinging to your sleeves. Out on the street, vendors are setting up for the day. You see a boy with a basket of greens, but no one stops to buy. You pause outside a tavern where a small chalkboard reads, "No lettuce, no lies, no lullabies." You chuckle. At least someone has a sense of humor about it. Inside, the tavern is warm, the windows fogged from stew and breath. You sit near the hearth and strike up a conversation with a gray-bearded man sipping ale with the slow determination of someone who's not in a hurry for anything. You mention the priest's warning. He grunts. They've always hated things that quiet you. Can't preach repentance to a man who's too calm to care. You ask if he misses it. Lettuce, that is. He shrugs. Not really. Never filled a stomach. but I remember a girl who said it helped her write. Said it slowed the noise in her head. What happened to her? He looks into his mug. Don't know. She stopped coming round. Outside, the bells toll again, this time for the next service. But you stay where you are, warmed by fire and folklore, wondering if there's a balance somewhere between faith and fear. Between eating and forgetting. And if lettuce was ever just food, or if it always carried the weight of something deeper. The rain finally comes in earnest, tapping at the rooftops like 1,000 impatient fingers. You duck into a quiet reading room attached to a guild hall, mostly deserted except for a sleepy steward and the occasional scribe copying invoices by candlelight. You're here for answers, or at least a distraction that might look like one. You head straight for the shelf marked Physic and Herbals. The books are heavy, leather-bound, filled with fading ink and the kind of marginalia that says someone once took all this very seriously. You run your fingers along the spines until you find it, the Greta Herbal, an English translation of an older French text, thick with diagrams and deeply suspicious of nearly everything that grows. You flip to the section on lettuce. It's longer than you expect. Lettuce is cold and moist in the 2nd degree. It killeth the sperm, it letteth the engendrage of children, and causeth dreams of dead men. You sit back. That's quite the resume for a salad leaf. According to this volume, and several others you skim, lettuce wasn't always dismissed. In earlier centuries, it was praised for calming the humors, aiding sleep, even tempering lust. But somewhere along the line, the praise thinned and the warnings thickened. Now it's all, be careful when the moon is waning. Avoid in times of sorrow. Do not combine with vinegar during mourning. Historians still argue whether these shifts reflect actual changes in belief or just a growing tendency to medicalize fear. But you're starting to see a pattern. People didn't just fear what lettuce did, they feared what it allowed. Silence. Stillness. Reflection. Not ideal in a city that survived on noise, haste, and gossip. You find a later volume, thinner, with neater handwriting. Possibly a student's notes or a practicing apothecary's private collection. In the margin beside a passage about lettuce's cooling properties, someone has scribbled, a virtue in stillness, until it deepens into vacancy. You stay until your fingers ache from turning pages. You learn that some scholars warned lettuce could dampen ambition, that it should never be served to judges or scribes during important deliberations. One physician even claimed it hindered memory, too much, and the mind would slip back upon itself like a dog chasing its tail. You close the book and glance around. The room is quiet, save for the gentle scrape of quills and the soft flutter of paper. The steward glances over at you. Looking into poisons, he asks dryly. No, you say. Lettuce. He nods solemnly. Ah. The long sleep. You blink. You believe it causes that? I believe what the books say. And the books say it calms what ought to be alert. He folds his hands. That can be dangerous in a world like this. He tells you a tale, probably half true, about a young lawyer who once consumed a lettuce tonic daily to combat anxiety. Grew slow, they said. Still in body. Still in thought. One day, he was asked to speak in court and simply didn't. Forgot his case entirely. Sat down, smiled, and never worked again. You return the books to their shelves and head back into the gray street. You're soaked within minutes, but you don't care. You pass a woman tucking a head of cabbage into her satchel and glance instinctively for green leaves among the produce. Nothing. Not even a wilted remnant. Back home, you light a candle and pull your own little notebook from the drawer. You write. Lettuce is a fear of stillness. A mistrust of silence. A leaf becomes a symbol when people lose the courage to slow down. You underline the word symbol. Because somewhere between the herbals and the sermons, the midwives and the street vendors, you've stopped seeing lettuce as just food. And that may be the most dangerous thing of all. You're passing by a playhouse along the river when you hear it. The crowd is laughing, loudly, heartily, as only Londoners can when they're too Alashan and no longer pretending to be pious. You pause, drawn in. The sign says it's a new comedy, something light before supper. You slip through the edge of the crowd and into the pit, careful not to step on any shoes or puddles of questionable origin. On stage, a woman in a feathered hat shrieks dramatically, "He gave me lettuce, my lord." Lettuce! What am I, a corpse already? The audience howls. The actors milk it. Moments later, a foppish nobleman pretends to faint at the sight of a salad bowl. No! Not that. Anything but the leaf of doom. More laughter, more cheers. You lean against the wall, stunned. Because here it is, everything you've been chasing through kitchens and churches, gardens and graveyards, served back to the city as farce. Lettuce, the punchline. The play rolls on. It's a satire, poking fun at noble anxieties and herbal quacks. One character keeps lettuce in his pockets to calm his temper, only to become so spiritually still he forgets how to walk. Another feeds it to his rivals in hopes of dulling their ambition. You watch, fascinated. The audience loves it. And yet, none of them eat from the real salad bowl the actors occasionally gesture toward. It's a prop, but even still, no one touches it. You notice. You ask the man next to you, red-nosed, happy, had ask you, if he eats lettuce. He leans close and says, "Course not. It's cursed, ain't it? But you're laughing." "Well, he slurs. You've got to laugh, or it eats you up from the inside. And there it is again, that London duality. Mock it publicly. Fear it privately. Turn danger into comedy so it won't follow you home. After the play, you linger as the crowd spills out into the street, chattering about favorite lines, memorable jests, and whether the jester was funnier than last week's. A few repeat the lettuce jokes to each other, but not one of them stops by the nearby Sowlet cart. It sits untouched. You take a stroll to the Globe, just to see if Shakespeare himself has weighed in. You bribe a clerk to let you peek at the scripts. In The Merry Wives, there's a reference to cold greens as a cure for excess. In Hamlet, Ophelia talks of rosemary for remembrance, but never lettuce. In fact, you can't find a single glowing endorsement. One scholar you speak to says it outright. Shakespeare used gardens as metaphor all the time. But never lettuce. Too easy. Too obvious. He knew it carried other meanings. You raise a brow. Such as? Well, the scholar says, lettuce is quiet. And quiet is dangerous when it's the wrong sort. You ask if the bard feared it. He shrugs. He feared many things. But lettuce? I think he found it funny. And terrifying. Historians still argue whether any of the lettuce lines in period plays were genuine medical jabs or simply low-hanging leafy humor. But the audiences laughed, and none of them wanted to take a bite. You head home with the tune of the stage song stuck in your head. Lettuce for the pious, lettuce for the proud. But eat too much, and you'll dream a shroud. The rhyme is meant to be funny, but it lingers longer than it should. That night, you dream of gardens. Rows and rows of leafy silence, soft as breath, stretching far into the fog. At the end of the path is a table, and on that table, a bowl. You don't wake screaming. You just wake still. You wake slower than usual. Not tired, exactly, just muted. The kind of morning where thoughts take their time crossing the room. You blink at the ceiling, at the slow crawl of sunlight through warped window glass, and wonder what's changed. Then you remember the dream. That table. That bowl. The lettuce you never touched. You sit up and glance toward the windowsill where you once thought about planting seeds. The little pot of rosemary there looks smug. Still no lettuce. As the city shakes off its slumber, you walk west, toward the taverns and music halls where London's sharper tongues sing their truth in rhyme and rhythm. You find one by the docks, low-ceilinged, loud, and full of the kind of people who'd steal your coin but also recite Virgil if the mood struck. Inside, a group of sailors are singing about a girl named Letty who stole my heart and sold it for wine. The chorus ends. A kiss in the dark, then she fed me a leaf. And I've not known passion nor hope nor grief. The crowd laughs. You don't. You talk to the fiddler between songs. He's missing 2 teeth and wears a feather in his hair. Where'd that verse come from, you ask? Old, he says. Older than me. We just changed the name. Letty, lettuce, close enough. You press. Why the leaf? He leans close, breath thick with ale. They used to say lettuce cooled the blood, cooled the desire, made men forget their mischief. Or worse, forget how to want. You've heard versions of this before, in courtly complaints, in midwife mutterings, in sermons that blamed soft leaves for soft morals. But this is the first time it's tied so bluntly to romance. Historians still argue whether lettuce was genuinely thought to dampen libido, or if the fear stemmed more from its association with sleep and stupor. But the cultural echoes are clear. Lettuce became love's enemy. A garnish for restraint. A seasoning for silence. You leave the tavern and head into the winding back streets. Here, the graffiti tells its own story, rude poems and pictograms scratched into stone, often just above eye level. On one shuttered door, you find. He brought her salad, she brought a sigh. You smirk, but the phrase hits harder than it should. You're beginning to understand something strange. Lettuce didn't just represent quiet. It became a kind of caution. Against longing. Against desire. Against heat. You pass a flower seller who's gossiping with her neighbor about a certain gentleman who stopped calling after his sweetheart served him cold greens 3 nights in a row. Said he lost interest in everything, including her, the woman says with a shudder. Further down the lane, a man accosts you with a tray of tinctures. Tired? Unfocused? Forgetful, he cries. Let me guess, lettuce in your diet? It's the root of many an invisible ailment. You decline, but he hands you a pamphlet anyway. Inside is a woodcut of a young man drooping in his chair, eyes vacant, plate full of leafy greens. The caption reads, "Cool on the tongue, cruel on the heart." You tuck it away. The sun is low when you reach the park near the old almshouses. Couples stroll past, wrapped in furs and conversation. You sit on a bench and watch the lovers move like poetry in motion, quiet words, fingers just touching, a world unfolding between them. You wonder how many of them know the stories. How many believe? A girl nearby pulls a leaf from her basket, bites into it. Not lettuce. Probably watercress. Still, her companion flinches. I thought we said no salad today, he murmurs. She grins. Only the peppery kind. The safe kind. He relaxes, but not completely. You head home through streets that now feel different. Not hostile, but watchful. As if every corner and alley and window has been quietly keeping score. You think about love songs rewritten into lettuce warnings. About herbal books and empty garden beds. About how something so small, so soft, so utterly ordinary could come to symbolize so much loss. You think, maybe lettuce wasn't feared because it was cold. Maybe it was feared because it made you cold. It begins with a rumor. They always do. This one whispers through the guild halls and student taverns. Someone served lettuce at a supper party last night, and no one died. You don't believe it at first. By now, the fear has sunk into the bones of the city. It lives in the space between jokes, in the pause before a priest mentions temperance, in the way vendors leave the green bits out of their descriptions. But the rumor spreads. And like a green shoot in winter, something begins to stir. At first, it's only the bold ones, university boys with ink-stained fingers and more confidence than sense. They gather late at night with candles and verse and declare it an experiment. A lettuce supper. You hear about it from a bookseller who was there. They passed it round like poison, he says. Tasted it with their eyes closed. Nothing happened. Not that night, anyway. You smile. Would they know if it did? He hesitates. Maybe not. Still, the next night, there's another supper. Then another. Each one a little less secret. Someone serves a salad at a merchant's gathering. The host calls it a gesture of bravery. Or maybe boredom. You're not sure which is more dangerous in this city. By the end of the week, a small cart appears in a square near Ironmonger Lane. It has no sign, just a row of clean bowls and a woman serving dressed greens with soft bread. The line is short, quiet, but it exists. You stand in it. When it's your turn, she asks no questions. Just hands you the plate. You sit on a bench with your back to the wind and stare at the leaves. Pale green, with edges curled inward like sleeping hands. Dressed in oil, sprinkled with salt, and, yes, lettuce. You take a bite. It's crisp. Mild, slightly bitter in a way that makes you want more. The flavor is so familiar, so unremarkable, it feels like being reunited with a memory you didn't know you missed. The second bite tastes like nothing at all. Just quiet. And you realize something startling. You're not afraid. Around you, the other diners eat in silence. Not solemn. Not fearful. Just present. No one weeps. No one faints. One man smiles and wipes his beard with a cloth napkin. A woman stands up, says thank you, and walks away humming. You sit there longer than you need to. Not because you feel odd or dizzy or spiritually still, but because this is the first time you've had the leaf and the story in the same place. The first time you've held both truth and myth in your hands and found them manageable. Historians will one day argue whether the fear of lettuce ever truly vanished or whether it simply shifted forms. Some say it never disappeared, just went dormant until the next panic found a new leaf to pin its dread upon. But you'll remember this, the moment London grew tired of fearing its own garden. That night, You pass through the same alleys where whispers once warned of death in a salad bowl. And now there's only the soft murmur of conversation, a dog barking in the distance, the city breathing again. When you reach home, you notice something you hadn't before, your windowsill planter. The rosemary has been joined by a new sprout. You didn't plant it, but there it is. Soft green, curling up toward the light. Lettuce. You don't pull it out. The next morning, you wake before the bells, before the coal smoke starts to rise, before the city begins its usual clatter of boots and barrows and argument. It's so early the sky is only just considering becoming blue. And yet, you're already standing at your tiny table, staring at a bowl of lettuce. You didn't mean to make a ritual of it, but here you are. The leaves are pale, rinsed, and still damp, catching the candlelight in a way that feels almost deliberate. There's no oil, no dressing, just the plant in its simplest form, like a truth too modest to wear embellishment. You lift a piece to your mouth, pause, and realize the old fear is still there, just smaller now. Familiar, like an ache from weathered memory. You chew slowly. The city outside is stretching. You hear the first cart creak past on the cobbles. A woman singing to herself as she sweeps a stoop. A cockerel in someone's distant yard trying to convince the world that today matters more than yesterday. You sit at the window and look out over a city that once whispered death into a salad bowl, and now just eats. Maybe still a little nervously. Maybe with lingering hesitation. But eats nonetheless. Later that day, you find yourself wandering back toward the markets. There's still no great revival. No salad stalls bursting with customers. But the change is there if you know how to look. A young couple sharing greens behind a cart. A tavern blackboard that now reads, "Yes, we serve it. No, we don't answer letters of complaint." And a few cautious planters tucked into windowsills between the rosemary and thyme. Lettuce has returned, not in triumph, not in mockery, but in quiet defiance. London never needed it to be glorious. Just ordinary again. You stop at the cart where it all began and order a bowl. The vendor doesn't blink, just smiles, passes you the dish, and moves on to the next customer. You sit and eat without ceremony, without explanation. You look around and see a boy eating with his father, a scribe reading between bites, a butcher's apprentice chewing thoughtfully as if the taste holds secrets he's not yet ready to share. The city has always been built on stories, some true, some not, most somewhere in between. The lettuce story is still there, like the fading taste on your tongue. But it no longer owns you. No longer shapes your shadow. When you rise to leave, the vendor hands you a single seed wrapped in cloth. "You're not the first," she says. "But you're one of the few who came back." You nod, pocket it, and walk into the morning with the kind of peace that doesn't need fanfare. The kind that comes after fear when fear has grown tired of holding the pen. And on your way home, in a city that once believed a leaf could kill the mind, you hum an old tune. Lettuce for the brave, and for those who wait. The coldest things soften when shared on a plate. And now, as the last of the lamps flicker low and the city curls inward for the night, you let yourself exhale. Slowly. Gently. Like steam rising from a quiet cup. The sounds of London have faded. No more carts. No more clanging pewter, no more whispers about what might be hiding in your salad bowl. Only the hush of night, the occasional creak of beams above you, the soft tick of your own breath. You lie back beneath your blanket, and your thoughts drift like leaves on still water. All the stories you've gathered, of midwives and market boys, of apothecaries and noble feasts, of dreams that vanished and courage that quietly returned, they settle, layer by layer, into something oddly soothing. A tapestry of fear, yes, but also of strange resilience. Because in the end, it wasn't just about lettuce, was it? It was about what people are willing to believe. About the strange power of silence in a world obsessed with noise. About how something soft can unsettle you more deeply than something sharp ever could. You realize now that sometimes, the scariest thing isn't death or madness, it's the idea that what calms you might be the very thing that changes you. But that moment has passed. The leaves are still. The city sleeps. And so should you. Let your thoughts fade like candle smoke, trailing into dreams that are yours and yours alone. No lettuce, no lullabies, just the warm weight of sleep pulling gently at your edges. You made it through the night. The story didn't bite. And tomorrow, if you want, there'll be a plate waiting, quiet, calm, and green. Sweet dreams.